So thanks for the folks that have already joined us. We'll probably just give people a couple more minutes to join us and then we'll get started. All right. Well, I will start us off if we're ready. 12:01 by my phone. So I just want to welcome everyone to the virtual webinar and thank everyone for taking time out of their day to talk about biking and walking in Elmhurst. And I'm going to just provide a very brief introduction about the project overall before we jump into the webinar. For those of you that might not know, this is an update to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. And this update to the plan will focus on specific recommendations that are actionable and implementation focused. And this update to the plan will also help the city take advantage of state and federal grant funding whenever available. And it will provide a long-term plan for making biking and walking more safe and more convenient in Elmhurst. We began working on this plan back in August 2019, and we had a very robust round of public engagement that Heather will talk more about later. And we used that public engagement coupled with more technical data like street widths and traffic counts, and put all of that information together to come up with these draft recommendations that we'll be going over today. So this is the second round of public engagement that we're doing now that we have some draft recommendations, and we have already received some public input on these, and we're really thankful for that. Thankful that the community is engaged with the plan and providing input, but please stay tuned. We're only about halfway through this process. We hope to have a draft plan in August, this coming August, for the community to review as well as the city council to review. So hopefully that will be coming to everyone in August. And I do want to say that I'm very thankful for the consultants who worked very hard to provide this type of format. Ideally, we would be doing this in person. We typically would do this face-to-face in front of maps, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to pivot to this more virtual format. And I'm really thankful for everyone on the team that was able to keep the momentum going and make sure that everyone had the information that they needed and ensure that the community is able to provide input and make their voice heard. as well as the steering committee. I'm thankful for everyone on the steering committee to participate and keep this project moving forward. So with that, I want to see if Mike Litwin, who is on the call, he is city staff, if he would like to add a couple comments, civil engineer with the city of Elmhurst.
Thanks, Emily. Can everyone hear me? I'm having some technical difficulties this morning.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so as Emily mentioned, these are draft recommendations put together by the consulting team and city staff. These are best practices, but these ideas may not work in all cases due to some unique situation that we don't know about. So with this in mind, we're looking forward to your thoughts and comments on these different options that we have out there, and let us know if there's something that might not work that we just don't realize. We're not out there every day in all these spots, so any feedback provided will be greatly appreciated by everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And I'm Jackie Hendrickson. I'm a planner and part of the consultant team, and I'm at Civil Tech Engineering, and I'm also joined here today by my colleagues, Josie Willman, John McGill, Mike Fulkening, and Phil Hutchinson, and also our partner on the project, Heather Shady from Active Transportation Alliance. All right, so here is a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So we just went through introductions, and then we're going to go through some tech tips. We're going to give you an overview of the planning process and where we're at in the timeline right now. And then we're going to delve into the recommendations. And we're going to give a very high level overview and of the different recommendation types that we are showing here. And then also let you know next steps and where you can provide more feedback. And additionally, we will have a question and answer session about 15 minutes at the end. And for questions that we don't have time to cover today, we will answer, and we will post those answers to the project website. And then throughout this presentation, we are also going to have some polling questions, and just an FYI that all of these will be anonymous. So we can go ahead and do the first polling question. And a pop-up box should have shown up on your screen asking about transportation choices and changes that you've made since COVID-19. All right, we'll give everyone a few more seconds to answer the 3 questions, and then we'll close the poll. All right, so now you can see the results of the poll. So it looks like we're about 50-50 in terms of transportation choices changing. And it looks like quite a few people are walking, 44%, biking, 25%. And we're pretty split too on whether or not we see long-term changes to our transportation choices. All right, so first we're gonna go over some quick tech tips. So we appreciate you joining us in this new format. This is a learning experience for us all, doing shifting a virtual open house from in-person to virtual. So if any tech issues do come up, we ask that you hit the chat button on your Zoom screen and just let us know what's happening. If any questions or comments come up on the recommendations that we're presenting, we ask that you submit those via the Q&A button. And then again, at the end, we will leave about 15 minutes for addressing the questions. And ones that we don't get to, we'll post on the project website. If for any reason you lose internet, we do have the call-in number, which is the 312-626-6799. And that call-in number and the webinar ID and password should also be in the emailed information that you received. And just an FYI that this webinar is being recorded and we're going to post it on YouTube later on for people who couldn't make it today. And once again, the polling questions are all going to be anonymous. Okay, so just to give a quick overview of our approach, our approach that we're taking is very community focused. So we've had a few robust rounds of community engagement. So we had one at the beginning in which we gathered information, and now that we've taken that information and developed draft recommendations, we are also doing a second round of community engagement. And we see this being really critical to the plan recommendations because all of you as people who live and work in the community are the true experts of it and know if some of these recommendations could work on your street. And for example, we've already gotten great feedback about Spring Road and the multiple options there. And we will take all of this feedback and we will revise the recommendations for the next round. So we also use a very data-driven process, looking at different features of the roadway and the context. And then all of the recommendations that we're making, we're trying to improve streets for all ages, all abilities, and all modes, from pedestrians, bicyclists, and even drivers too. And then it's also going to be implementation focused. So we're really looking for recommendations that are shovel ready and can be implemented on the streets and are positioning the city for grant funding opportunities as well. So Emily touched on this before, but this is where we're at in the project timeline. We previously did a survey and a robust round of engagement, and now that we have recommendations, we're doing a second round. We're doing this virtual format to keep the momentum going for this project, but we'll see where the world is at in the summer later on, and if it's possible to do something in person. And then we will finalize the recommendations later on once we receive your great feedback, and with the hopes of it being presented and adopted by the City Council later on this summer. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our partner on the project, Heather Shady.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jackie. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a context for why the city is doing this plan. And also, as Emily mentioned, I'll talk a bit about what we learned in the process so far from the community. So first of all, why a plan update for the city of Elmhurst? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Some of you may remember that the city developed a plan about 10 years ago, specifically focused on bicycle and pedestrian improvements. This plan is an update to that, and it's looking at new and modern best practices that have changed and evolved a lot since the development of that initial plan. We've learned quite a bit about how to design for people riding bikes, how to design for pedestrians, and also how to make everybody interact more in a better way on the road. And so we're looking at these recommendations from a new context. As Jackie mentioned, we're also looking to make this an actionable plan. So oftentimes you'll see a plan developed for a community that doesn't get a lot of traction. And we are attempting to not do that with this project by developing recommendations that have been vetted by the community and are supported by them, and also making sure that they're consistent with modern standards, best practices, and ready to be either funded locally or get federal funding to build and design them. Next slide. So also we want to point out that having a transportation plan that's focused on walking and biking is really something that can support everyone in the community. As Jackie mentioned earlier, we're focused on creating ideas and recommendations that support all users of the road, regardless of their age or ability. And our focus is really thinking about how people who are dependent on non-car travel get around, and make sure that there are options for them available and that they're comfortable, low stress, and accessible. In any given community, there's about 30% of people who don't drive, either because they're too young to have a license, they've aged out of driving, they have a disability that prevents them from operating a car, or they just can't afford to have a car. And so we know that these people need services and need the ability to get around their communities. And sometimes that means creating walking, biking, and transit-friendly places to help get them around. Next slide. So you know, while the focus is on perhaps the more vulnerable users of the population, having a community that supports walking and biking is good for everyone, regardless of how you get around. You've probably noticed that traffic congestion has improved quite a bit over the past few months with the stay-at-home order, and you've probably noticed changes to the way you feel about walking around or riding your bike because of that. So if we think about in the long term, creating a community that really supports less traffic and more forms of transportation, you might see those benefits long term. Health is another thing that we really think about and focus on with our recommendations. So people who walk and bike regularly are healthier as a result. If you can kind of build that into your daily routine and schedules, walking or biking for transportation, you'll likely see a lower rate of heart disease, better mental health, less diabetes in your community, and the list goes on. So kind of doing these things creates and supports a healthy and sustainable community. Safety is another factor we're really focused on. So we want to make sure that whatever recommendations are put forward are grounded in best practices and are proven to create a safer environment for everybody on the road, whether it's a person driving, walking, or biking. And so we have been looking very closely at that in the recommendations we're presenting today, and obviously are continuing to learn more about safety issues in the community, and we'll apply those as well. Finally, I'll skip over environment. I think, again, it's clear, you know, less traffic congestion means cleaner air, and that's good for most people, especially people who are suffering from asthma in communities. And then finally, having a community that supports walking and biking, especially to business districts, can help create a healthier local economy. So one stat we like to throw out there a lot is that one study found that people who walk and bike to local businesses make more frequent trips and therefore spend more money over time than people that drive to them. So they might spend smaller dollar amounts during those trips, maybe because they're carrying something home or on their bike or on their person, but because of that, they are visiting local businesses more often and therefore spending more money over time. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what we've done so far. Both Jackie and Emily teased a little bit that we've been talking to the community for quite some time now. So here's some of the ways that we talked to people who we reached, and I'll then go into what we learned. So over the course of the past 6 months or so, we've held some smaller events and larger events. We held several focus groups with 6 different targeted community groups, including Elmhurst Hospital, the school, the private school districts, I'm blanking, the Economic Development Commission, and the Cool Cities. We held an online survey that was filled out by 398 residents, and I'll give you a little bit more information on what we learned from that. We also have hosted a project website called bikewalkelmhurst.com. So far, we've seen 1,100 unique visitors to that website, and we've gotten several messages and comments through it from people who were excited about the plan or had comments for us about it. We also tabled at a couple of large events, including the fire station open house and the Elmhurst Cycling Classic. We hosted 2 steering committee meetings, which were made up of 9 local and regional organizations, including DuPage County Department of Transportation, School District, Bike Elmhurst, and several city departments. And then we also hosted a map on Wiki Mapping, which you might have also filled out. 121 people marked different lines, telling us where there's difficult bike routes, difficult walking routes, and 201 markers showed us where difficult crossings are. And the map you see on the right-hand side of the page shows where each of those issues is. Next slide. So when we surveyed residents, we asked some questions just to get a sense of what people's priorities and concerns are. And one of the questions in our survey asked people to respond to the question, what are the top factors that influence your decision to walk or bike somewhere? So for walking, our survey respondents overwhelmingly told us that shoveled sidewalks and snowy conditions were something that they really thought about if they were choosing to walk or not. Presence of sidewalks was another high factor. 86% of the survey respondents told us that they would walk if there were sidewalks and would not if there weren't. Ease of crossing at intersections, 77% of the survey respondents told us that that was a primary concern for them. So if it was difficult to cross the street, they probably would choose a different mode of transportation. Presence of trails or paths, 66% of people told us that. We had a lot of people responding to the survey that they don't necessarily walk for transportation, but walk for recreation. So recreational trails are a big component of that for them. And then the fifth highest factor that people told us about was speed of traffic along their route. So if cars are traveling faster, they may not feel as comfortable to walk somewhere and will choose a different mode. For cyclists, distance was a large factor. So 100% of respondents told us that if it was too far away, they weren't going to ride their bike to a location. Same with interactions with drivers. So if they had a more comfortable or less comfortable experience on the road with different users, they may or may not ride as a result. Comfort of crossing at intersections was another highly rated option amongst the survey users, followed by presence of trails. And then finally, the conditions of roads on people's routes. So if it's bumpy, maybe they have potholes, or other factors, maybe leaves in the fall or snow in the winter, people may choose not to ride their bike as a result. Next slide. So we also asked respondents to tell us how far they're willing to walk and ride their bikes. So here's a quick screenshot of what they told us. 78% of people said they're willing to walk up to a mile to reach a destination, and 35% said they'd be willing to walk up to 2 miles. This gets you pretty far if you're walking within the city of Elmhurst. So if you walk from a mile from your house to a destination, you'll likely reach a lot of places. And if you're willing to walk up to 2 miles, that's even more of the city. So it's interesting to think that if the ideas that were presented in the previous slide as things that people decide about walking or biking, if those were improved, then people may be more willing to walk more places within the community. For biking, people are willing to bike up to, 71% of people are willing to bike up to 5 miles, and 36% are willing to bike more than 5 miles to reach a destination. So again, this can get you pretty much throughout the entire city, which is interesting to think about if you're thinking about ways to improve transportation. Now I'll turn it over to Jackie, who will talk about the recommendations from the plan.
All right, great. Thank you, Heather. So we're going to go give an overview of some of the recommendations that you can see in the plan. And I will start it off by saying that this is a high-level overview, and there are many more details on the story map, which we will tell you more about, as well as the online survey. So basically, first I'm going to go through some bike recommendations, and these recommendations are going to progress from less protected, less intensive facility types, such as marked shared lanes, to more intensive, such as a trail. So first, on this slide, you can see marked shared lanes and bike boulevards. And these are both very similar in that the design is on the street. So you can see in the lower part of the screen, the sharrows. So the sharrows indicate where a cyclist should position themselves on the roadway to stay out of both the door zone, the car opening door zone, and also the line of car traffic. So marked shared lanes, the key difference is that for marked shared lanes, cars generally will pass the cyclist, whereas a bike boulevard is going to be on a lower traffic volume, calmer street, and cyclists are encouraged to take the lane, and it's more of a bike priority street. And bike boulevards are often accompanied with other traffic calming features and safety features that also improve the environment for pedestrians as well. So there are a few examples below. You can see on the bottom left and the bottom right, some key streets where we would be recommending these facility types. And you can also see more details about these and the exact locations on the story map. But some key examples here are some north-south connections to the Prairie Path. Those were identified as a priority in the first round of community engagement, getting to the Prairie Path. So we saw Spring Road being a key street for that. And then the bike boulevards, you can see the key streets are Poplar Ave, 3rd Street, Prospect/Mitchell, and Madison Street. And then we also have a concept to the right of what a bike boulevard could look like on Poplar Avenue. And then on the left, you see some what we call typical sections of how the road would be reconfigured for marked shared lanes on Spring Road. All right, and now we are going to go to another anonymous poll. And we will give everyone about 20 to 30 seconds for answering the question. All right, let's give everyone about, oh, poll closed. All right. So it looks like if these proposals were made, 67% of people would be more likely to bike in Elmhurst, 29% unsure, 4% or 5% no. And then how comfortable, it looks like 43% would be somewhat, 29% very comfortable, 19% somewhat uncomfortable, 10% neutral. All right. So next, we will discuss advisory bike lanes and bike lanes. And these are very similar treatments. So you can see the conventional bike lanes on the right and the advisory bike lanes on the left. And the difference is really width. So advisory bike lanes, they tend to be on streets that don't have quite enough width for the conventional bike lanes. So in most instances, cars and cyclists can be in their separated lanes. But if there is a heavier vehicle, such as a larger truck, a bus, the larger vehicle could yield to cyclists and potentially merge into the advisory bike lane. So these are a bit more intensive than the treatments you saw on the previous slide, but they still are on road. So for example, West Avenue in the public engagement was identified as a top priority for a bike route. And we see this as being a potential street where the advisory bike lanes could be utilized, as well as Spring Road. And then on the right, you can see examples for York Street and Spring Road. And just as a note, multiple options were prepared for both York Street and Spring Road. All right, and we have another poll. And we'll give everyone about 20 seconds to answer the questions. All right, All right, so it looks like 65% would be more likely to bike in Elmhurst if they were implemented, 10% no, 25% uncertain. How comfortable would you feel biking on bike lanes? 45% very comfortable, 25% somewhat comfortable, 20% somewhat uncomfortable, and 10% neutral. All right, and to move forward, so these recommendations, buffered bike lanes and protected bike lanes, these would also still be on street, on pavement recommendations. So the differences here is that these are very similar to bike lanes, but it is providing a bit more width for the bike lanes. So there would be a buffer. The buffer could either be on the outside, just to give more separation between the bicyclists and traffic, or it could be on the inside. A good example of that would be on a road where there's a lot of parking. So to keep the cyclists out of the parking door zone. And then the protected bike lanes, these would have that same buffer, but then they would also have a physical barrier protection. So phase one of this might be a plastic bollard, And a second phase could be more of a permanent cement sort of barrier. So one example of an existing buffered bike lane would be on Addison Ave in the downtown. And then we would be proposing a two-way protected bike lane on the shoulder area on Brush Hill Road. And that would help connect cyclists between the Salt Creek Trail and Elmhurst Hospital. And we have another poll. Oh, sorry, went too fast. Okay, we'll give everyone a little bit of about 5 more seconds to respond. All right, so about 76% would be more likely to bike in Elmhurst, and 67% would be very comfortable with these facility types. All right, and finally, the most intensive bike facility type recommendations that we're proposing are side paths and multi-use trails. And something to note for these is that they can, of course, also be used by pedestrians. So a side path is very similar to a trail, but it goes alongside, in most instances, a major roadway. So it'd be similar to a sidewalk, but a lot wider so that way both pedestrians and bicyclists could use the space. And then multi-use trails. So Elmhurst already has a lot of great regional trails in the community, such as the Salt Creek Trail and the Prairie Path. So in some instances, we're recommending adding in more trails as well. And then these would often be, and actually the whole bike route network would be accompanied with wayfinding signage. And this would show cyclists where they should go, where they should turn to reach different destinations, and the distance that it would take to get there. And that's really helpful for people who aren't as familiar with the safe roads to bike on in the community. And then on the left, you can see some key streets where we are recommending some side paths, and such as St. Charles Road, Butterfield Road, Church Road. And then on the right, you can see some key places where we would be recommending some new multi-use trails, such as in the northern portion of the community, there's a ComEd right-of-way that could potentially be a place for a trail, and Wilder Park as well. And we have another poll. All right, and I think we can shut the poll down. All right, so 81% would be more likely to bike in Elmhurst, 52% very comfortable, 33% somewhat comfortable. All right, and so we also have some roads in Elmhurst in which we found from community engagement from the first round and from overall connectivity that it makes sense that these roads are bike routes. But at this point, more information, more study would be needed to determine the best option, the best alternative to carry forward. So we provided at this stage a few different options, and Spring Road, as we mentioned earlier, we've already received a lot of great feedback on this one. And we've heard from the community and from the business community especially that there could be a potential issue with removing the parking from one side of the street. And so info such as that, we definitely want to hear more of from the community. And we want to hear how these recommendations, especially on the ones that have multiple options, which one you think could be more feasible if you see any issues, because your input is really critical. So with both of these, further study would be needed, and there'd be, of course, more rounds of study to determine the best option. So Spring Road is one of them. One recommendation would involve bike lanes, but that would involve the removal of parking from one side. Or the second option, parking could remain on both sides, and it could be a marked shared lane recommendation. And then York Street. So this section, this is a small portion of York between Van Buren and Butterfield, where we see we could potentially do a side path and a buffered bike lane, or perhaps keep the bicyclists off the street in that portion altogether, and it would be a side path. So we encourage you all to look closer at the recommendations and provide your input on all of them in the survey. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, John, to go over the rest of the recommendations.
Hello, I'm John. Here is our pedestrian improvement toolbox. So the first one in the upper left, raised crosswalks. So this is kind of like a speed hump, but it has a crosswalk in the middle of it. So the crossing itself is flush. So it draws attention of motorists to the crosswalk, sort of forces them to pay attention to it and makes pedestrians a little safer. Another is a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or an RRFB. These are button controlled crossings with excellent signage that draws attention to the roadway. Pedestrian medians in the lower left are it's a pedestrian island essentially, and you can either cross the road in 2 phases if people aren't obeying the signage. It also prevents people from cutting the corner as a motorist when they're driving, so it keeps them from illegally entering the lane for oncoming traffic, which is very common when people are trying to cross. The high visibility crosswalk that we recommend is the continental style crosswalk, which is we've determined to be the most visible type, and that is always shown in the longest axis of the road paint is most visible to the motorist. So it's moving in the same direction that they are. Additionally, we want to improve sidewalk connections, and this allows people to not be walking in the street because there's a sidewalk for them to be walking on. On the right, you can see a map which shows all of the gaps in the sidewalk in your community, which there's quite a few. And we found that 86% of survey respondents said the presence of sidewalks would increase their likelihood to walk more. And we also have some key places that we're proposing, including Van Auken Street, Armitage Avenue, Carolyn Avenue into 3rd Street, and York Street, which we're proposing as a flex street, which I'll touch on in a moment. Next slide, please. Or poll, sorry. Here are the poll results. If the proposed pedestrian improvements were implemented, would you be more likely to walk in Elmhurst? 71% say yes, 14% say no. Rate the importance of sidewalk improvements to Elmhurst transportation system. 67% feel it's very important, 19% somewhat important, and 5% very unimportant. Here is our toolkit for intersection improvements. One is curb extensions. This bumps out the curb a bit near the crossing to shorten the distance that people have to cross. The shorter the crossing, the safer the crossing is. Also, by including a curb, it keeps motorists, it forces them to pay attention. An additional strategy is wayfinding signage. These are very useful if you're on your bike and maybe you don't ride your bike every day or something, not terribly often. You can be out for a bike ride and you can see this signage and it can direct you where you need to go. Another strategy is bike boxes. Bike boxes, as shown in this example, can connect to a bike lane. Typically they're in the specific shade of green paint, which is associated with bike paths, and this puts you in front of cars. It's very common when cars are turning right and a cyclist is going straight that the cyclist and the car will collide. It's a very common type of bicycle accident. And so by putting bicyclists out in front of the cars when they're stopped at a light, it enhances their visibility. Another is mini traffic circles. This simplifies a complex intersection by making everyone go in the same direction. And you can see that in this example, the curb is flush. And one of the reasons for this is that it doesn't prevent emergency vehicles from being able to access the road around it. Another strategy is bike crosswalks. Bike crosswalks use the green paint and elephant foot style road paint to draw attention of motorists to cyclist crossing while directing cyclists in how to cross in order to get to the bike path on the other side of the intersection. And then the last example in the lower right, we commonly call this a pork chop, which is probably the terminology I will use. It's another word would be the corner island and right turn slip lane improvement. And this gives pedestrians a place to stand at a complex right turn where it's common for there to be a change in direction of the crosswalk. You want the crosswalk paint itself to be moving in the same direction as motorists so that it's more visible. And you can see in this example, there's a pedestrian crosswalk moving through the bike lane, which draws attention of cyclists to pedestrians. And here we see the York Flex Street existing on the left and proposed on the right. And an important takeaway for this is that we are not proposing to remove or remove parking, and cars will still be able to access the road. We call it a flex street because it's a flexible space that can be altered to fit the needs of the users in the moment. So we use some placemaking elements such as festoon lighting, festoon festival. They're very lively, very fun. Additionally, lighting at night improves safety. It makes people feel more comfortable. It also designates the space as like a special place that you can seek out as a destination. The Gateway Arch, which we're showing here as City Center Plaza, it designates the area as like a very special place. It's a destination where you head to do fun things. We're proposing decorative crosswalks. Now these dress up the downtown a bit while also enhancing safety. And so for the flexible street design, we're proposing pavers across the roadway. Pavers across the roadway do a few things. One is that they make it a little bit more formal. They make it, it sort of has an old world aesthetic. It's a little more elegant. Additionally, when people are driving on pavers, usually they slow down a little bit. It also marks a transition and forces drivers to pay attention. And in this example, the curbs are flush, which means they're at the same level. The roadway and the pedway are at the same level. And so we provide, or we propose, additional street furniture, which has a few functions, one of which obviously if it's a bench or something, you can sit on it, trash can, you can use it, but it also armors the pedway against motorists, so they're less likely to enter the pedway because there's not going to be as many queues, or there's not going to be the queue of the curb to stay in the roadway. So there's additional elements, furniture, trees, things like that to keep people safe on the sidewalk while making it a more equal space for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorists. And as I said earlier, it's a flexible space. So this is a space that could be closed down on a weekend for a holiday or something, for some sort of festival. And if you have a cafe on the street, you might be able to close down a few parking spots with some street furniture to sort of claim that space temporarily as a cafe space. And now we have a poll. Do you see the Flex Street having a positive contribution to Elmhurst's downtown? %75 say yes, and 5% say no. So an additional thing that was identified as difficult in our community outreach was connections to trails. On the left, you can see Salt Creek Trail and Brush Hill Road. Currently, if you are riding your bike on Brush Hill Road and you need to access the trail, there's a cut through in the housing there, which isn't necessarily great for everyone, including the housing development itself. So we're proposing a switchback. If we could see the rendering for that. So this rendering shows a switchback that transitions down from the roadway to the trail, and you can see at the top there the green bike lane on one side and the pedestrian lane on the other. And this does the service of communicating to people that they're about to enter a shared space, and the switchback itself helps to slow down cyclists, especially as they enter the Salt Creek Trail at such a sharp angle. So it helps to slow everybody down, keep everyone safe while providing excellent access to the trail. And then on the right, currently there is an RRFB type crossing at Prairie Path and York, but a lot of people don't feel very safe on it. And one of the complaints is for motorists that cyclists are entering the crosswalk too quickly, and that cyclists and pedestrians don't necessarily feel safe crossing there. Motorists are moving along pretty quick. So we're proposing in our rendering to transform the space into, we have two options for this. Alternative A is a little bit more restrained. We want to put bicycle stop signs in the Prairie Path itself and additional signage near the stop bar while bumping the stop bars back a pretty appreciable distance from the crossing itself. The crossing itself would be flush and made of concrete, and the concrete is a different color, texture, material than the pavers which are around it, and the pavers lift up to make the crossing flush. The pavers help to draw attention to the space with their color, while at the same time their texture helps to slow down motorists. And then in our second option, I forgot to mention on alternative A in the Prairie Path, we're proposing chicane, a chicane impediment in the pathway there. So it's a fence with signage on it, and it forces you to meander around the fence, and it forces you to slow down and pay attention so that you're more safe as you enter the crosswalk. And then, sorry, alternative B. Excellent, thank you.
And John, do you mind if I interrupt?
Yeah, please do.
I just wanted to mention for, I believe both of these options near York and the Prairie Path, it would be something that we would develop with a policy. These recommendations wouldn't be something that we would want to add to necessarily every intersection. It would be something that would be recommended along with a policy for when and where they would be appropriate. Mostly along corridors near parks or schools, but it's certainly not something that we would consider for every intersection, because that would be something that would be a little too redundant, and then it would stop bringing people's attention to that specific area. Thank you. Just wanted to point that out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Perfect. And then in alternative B, this is a slightly more dialed up version, and it would use, it would add landscape amenity green space to this section. The crosswalk is farther down relative to alternative A, so it's farther away from the viewer in this case, and it's the same raised crosswalk, which is flush with the RRFBs and ADA accessibility pads. But the chicane in this alternative are, it's based on fencing, and the fencing forces people to move around it in order to access the crossing. And we feel that this would be a pleasant looking alternative, which would still greatly enhance the safety of users for both motorists and pedestrians. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, we have a poll. Do you see the proposed trail connections encouraging people to use the trails? %72% say yes. 6% say no. Do you see the proposed trail connections improving trail safety? 78% say yes. 6% say no. Major corridor crossings. So these are very large streets, and we've probably all had the experience of crossing a very large intersection like this. It can be a little terrifying at times. And so we've come up with some strategies to improve the crossing safety. You can see in the case of Butterfield Road and York Street, there's a lot of multi-directional, somewhat cattywampus crosswalks. And so we're proposing to straighten those out while adding some additional amenities, such as enhancements to the existing medians, which would force drivers to not go into the lane of the opposing traffic when they're making their turns, while protecting pedestrians that are crossing. Additionally, we are proposing a side path, which would be a shared space for both for pedestrians and cyclists, and crossings that are dedicated to cyclists. Additionally, we would change the angle that the pork chop is at, so the enhanced pedestrian island crossing, would work in conjunction with signage to improve the crosswalk condition at all 4 legs of the intersection. The median islands would also get signage to draw attention of motorists to their presence, preventing the motorists from hitting them. And then at Butterfield Road and Spring Road, there's a lot of trails here, which you can see to the west. And currently there's not really much in terms of bicycle connections. So we're improving some, or we're proposing some improvements to this intersection as well. There's a lot of signage here. So we want to tell cyclists where they can go and what the distance is to get there, to major features like the hospital, Salt Creek Trail, or York High School. This has the same bicycle crossings, dedicated bicycle crossing, draws attention of motorists to bicycles in the roadway, while providing ADA accessible access at all 4 legs and additional crossings of the continental style. And now we have a pole. Do you see the proposed major crossing improvements encouraging people to walk and bike? %65 feel yes. 12% feel no. Do you see the proposed major crossing improvements improving safety for pedestrians and cyclists? 82% say yes, and 6% say no. St. Charles Road and Berkeley Avenue is one of the school crossings of major roads that we identified as a problematic area in our community outreach. So we're proposing to alter the crossing to add an additional crosswalk at the leg of the intersection that's farthest from the camera in this case, and improve the crossing condition at all 3 legs with continental style crossings. Additionally, on St. Charles Road, we're proposing a median island, which would turn the crossing into a 2-step crossing if traffic was real heavy, or while protecting pedestrians with bollards. These bollards could match the bollards that are existing at the track across the street. There would be some change to the timing of the lights, but it wouldn't be huge changes in order to achieve that. And it would greatly improve the safety of how motorists are turning because of the presence of the median, which is buffered, and would just make the crossing much less stressful. And then for North Avenue and Emroy Avenue, there's currently a underpass. Some people have expressed discomfort at using the underpass. And so we're proposing some changes to the at-grade crossing condition. Melrose Avenue and Emroy Avenue, we're proposing raised crosswalk crossings. So this would be flush, and part of that would involve a mountable curb. And because the curb is mountable, we're proposing some bollards as well, which would keep motorists in the roadway, which you can see in the perspective rendering at the lower right. Additionally, we're proposing new at-grade crossings for East North Avenue itself, and decreasing the corner radii, which forces cars which are turning to pay greater attention as they are turning, which hopefully improves the visibility of pedestrians. Additionally, on East North Avenue, we're proposing bike crossings, which would be dedicated crosswalks just for cyclists.
And John, I'm sorry, do you mind if I
Please
interrupt
jump in.
again? I just want to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. So if folks do need to take off, you can see the answers to all of the questions on bikewalkelmhurst.com, as Heather said in the chat. And this will be on YouTube, as we mentioned before. But sorry to interrupt. Thank you.
No problem.
And I'll
Do you
just
see
say,
the
if you can stay on a few more minutes, we only have four more slides left. So
Thanks,
we're
Heather.
almost there.
Do you see the proposed school crossing improvements on major roads encouraging kids to walk and bike to school? %, feel yes. Do you see the proposed school crossing improvements on major roads improving safety for kids walking and biking to school? 88% say yes. School crossings, neighborhood roads. Poplar Avenue, Cayuga Avenue, and Wilson Street is a very complex intersection, which is located very near to Jefferson Elementary School. And it's a very large expanse of asphalt currently. And so we're proposing the addition of a, sorry if I cut out there, we're proposing a additional traffic circle, which is like a mini roundabout. And this would be a mountable curb that would not prevent access of fire trucks and emergency vehicles from being able to access the road. There's a stop sign at all intersections, including for the access to the cycle track or to the cyclist path. And on the cycle path, there is a sign indicating that bicyclists are to yield to pedestrians. So it's a shared space that prefers pedestrians. Or gives preferential treatment to pedestrians. Additionally, we're proposing signage which would direct cyclists to local features such as the elementary school. Poplar Avenue and First Street, we identified some difficult crossing conditions at Avon Road and Berteau Avenue. And so at both of these, we're proposing a crossing, continental style crossing. And on East First Street, coming off of Avon Road, we're proposing a new sidewalk. And Berteau Avenue, Avon Road, and South Poplar Avenue would all become bike boulevards. So there's lots of additional crossings. Do you see the proposed school crossing improvements on neighborhood roads encouraging kids to walk and bike to school? Other kinds of crossing improvements include Carolyn Avenue and 3rd Street, where there is a transition of East 3rd into Carolyn Avenue near a very large park. And people tend to drive a little too quickly on this road and it's difficult to cross. And so we're proposing a series of 3 raised crosswalks, which will slow drivers down with RRFB style crossings. And we're also proposing bike racks, and this would be a very bike-centric addition with bike boulevard road paint being added to the roadway to turn it into a bike boulevard. Bike route signage to direct people to local features, and shared lane yield to bike signage for motorists. Church Street and York Street, we're proposing some bike and pedestrian friendly changes, such as bike boxes. If you're on East Church Street and you are crossing onto South York Street, there are bike boxes for you to make your turn more safely. This can, I guess I talked a bit about bike boxes earlier. So that's one of the amenities here. Additionally, East Church Street becomes a bike boulevard. You can see there's some green road paint at intersections that cross the bike path, which is proposed for South York Street. And so the lane would constrict a bit, but you know, it would still be comfortable to drive in. Additionally, there are dedicated bike crosswalks. If the proposed improvements that we presented so far were made, would you be more likely to walk about?
Looks like we weren't getting feedback on that one, so I think we'll just move on. All right, so hi everyone,
Cool,
I'm
now
Josie.
I'm gonna hand it over to Josie, sorry.
You're fine, John. Hi everyone, I'm Josie. Kind of blitz through this just to be aware of everyone's time, but as you've heard throughout this presentation, I've also mentioned the story map tool, and so that's a tool that we have to complement what we're presenting on this webinar. It's an online tool, and it will go in a lot more detail about the different network recommendations that we've talked about. And then within that, there's also a survey that goes a little bit more in depth. So it's another opportunity to provide more feedback and help us create better recommendations in the next round. And then just a few, we've heard there's been some compatibility issues as people have accessed this. We just wanted to give a quick update on how to best get the experience with using this tool. So it's not compatible with Internet Explorer, but Microsoft Edge is compatible with it. We've also heard that older cell phone models have had some issues. So if possible, we recommend viewing this on a desktop to get that best viewing experience. And then most of these images are also included on that online survey, which is accessible on the project website. And so that is another opportunity to get a visual of what we're recommending if you're not able to access the story map. And then the link to the story map is also located on the project website. And then just to look at some next steps. So as we've mentioned, please view that story map. It'll give you more details on the different recommendations that we're proposing. Also encourage you guys to take the online survey. Again, that's a way for us to collect feedback to make changes to our recommendations in the final plan. And then any questions, again, that weren't addressed will be posted to the project website. And then as always, please contact us if you have any questions, and then please help spread the word if you can. So I think now we'll move into the Q&A portion. It looks like a lot of the questions were being answered live, so hopefully we were able to give some good answers there. It looks like there are still some outstanding questions. One is an anonymous question. Will actual pedestrian biker volumes drive prioritization in what we're planning in our recommendations along with community feedback? So Jackie, I don't know if you want to take a stab at answering that.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one. Thanks, Josie. So we will not be collecting, as part of this study, we won't be collecting pedestrian or bike volumes for every recommendation. But that is something, that could be potentially considered for corridors where we're recommending more study needs to be looked at to determine the best route for moving forward. So multiple options could be one example, or if there are specific target locations, we could potentially look into that for this study, but that will be determined after we gain this feedback, look closer, and sort of look where there are different questions and what needs to be discovered further.
Thank you, Jackie. And then this is a question that might be for the city. We have another one about what is the timeline if this proposal is accepted?
Is that
I think it means just like the plan in general.
the implement? Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want me to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, if you would like to.
So we're going to take the engagement that we got here, the input that we got here, and go back and review some of these recommendations and begin to develop a draft plan. That draft plan will then go out to the community again, and we'll be looking for your thoughts on the draft plan as well as bringing it to City Council. The goal for that is to have that available for City Council in August, and then the City Council will review that and consider adopting it, possibly with changes, most likely with a lot of review and changes. And we'll be working with City Council and the rest of staff team here to bring that forward. And I'm not sure if this question has something to do with the actual implementation of these, but that would be something that would be part of the long range plans of the city. So it might be specific to particular areas where we know there's already roadway improvements planned, or it might be something that would have to be reviewed and added to the budget if not already planned work. So hopefully that answers the question. And feel free
Yeah,
to
something
add
else
anything.
Yeah, something to add too is that a lot of these recommendations would involve a future engineering study. So we are in the planning phase right now, but before big changes could be made, we would want to do another engineering feasibility study.
All right, we have another question from Mike Myers. Where the crossings are on the metro station looked at as part of the plan, doesn't seem to be adequate crossings north of the station on First currently. I don't know if Heather, you want to take a stab at answering that?
So I'm trying to think of, okay, so north of the station at First. I think I might need Jackie or someone who's involved more on the design side to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, so at this stage, I believe we don't have specific recommendations at those locations, but this is a great opportunity to let us know where else we should be looking and where there are problem spots.
If I can jump in on that one, that as part of the metro station improvements that are in planning right now, and we're not in close to final design on those, but there is another crossing underground under the train station, under the train tracks proposed at this time, which would add another crossing at the train tracks there. I think it's confusing saying north of the station, maybe east or west of it if we're adding under anything. The only thing we're adding east and west of the station is under the tracks that we're looking to do with the train station improvements.
So I think that's all the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A section. If there's anything
And I also
missed,
wanted to,
yep, go ahead,
sorry,
Emily.
Josie. I wanted to thank Mary for her comment about 3rd Street and Kelly for her comment about Spring Road. All of those, hopefully the typed responses were helpful. And if we have any follow-up questions on that, we're certainly available to discuss. Sorry to interrupt, Josie, go ahead.
No, you're totally fine. I was gonna say, if we go through the transcript and we find anything we'll miss, we'll be sure to post answers to that on the project website.
Yeah, also, if you have anything specific you want to contact us about, any questions or specific comment, you can also reach us through the project website, and we have a comment form where you can sign up for updates, but also reach a member of the team. I personally read all of them, and we can respond that way too.
All right, so thank you for joining us all, and we appreciate you guys taking time out to listen to our webinar and hear about the different ideas we have, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.